APWA represents public works departments, big and small, across the country. But with big cities and counties come big challenges. To discuss the issues they're facing and how APWA is supporting them, I'm joined by APWA CEO Scott Grayson, LA City Engineer Ted Allen, and St. Paul Public Works Director Sean Kershaw. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And Scott, I'm going to start with you. How does APWA focus on these issues facing these big cities? And tell us about the Big Cities, Big Counties Forum.
Sure, great. So I started my role about 8 years ago, and the big cities and counties were absent. Not a lot of them had joined, not a lot of them were as engaged, and I didn't understand why. So with outreach, we started speaking with a lot of them. We formed a group, and our definition of big cities is about 400,000 population up, roughly, and there's only about 36 to 40 big cities or counties with that population. So we formed a group. We meet twice a year, and we speak about all of the current issues that are impacting big cities and counties in the United States.
And Ted and Sean, talk to us about what's the same and what's different about running the big cities and counties.
So essentially with big cities, it's the same challenges as a small city, except at a much bigger scale, of course. But with that, we become much more siloed a lot of times. And so communication and coordination becomes much more important to make sure the different departments in the city are on the same page.
Would you agree with that?
100%. I mean, the forces impacting us, whether that's climate change or how communities are changing, are the same. But the complexity, the scope, and the scale are really different. And Ted's exactly right, that in our own department, it's easy to become siloed in your one area and forget that the public sees our work, all together and all linked. So I think it's the dynamics are the same, but the scope and scale and complexity are really different.
And Ted, we've been hearing at the entire conference about staff shortages, and I understand that that's an issue that you're facing in LA as well. Speak to that, and what are some of the solutions that you're working towards?
Yeah, one of the big initiatives that I've been making with our staff, so of course we're working on filling positions as always and getting more positions if we can, but I've really been working to get our staff and our managers to look at it differently, because I think we're always going to feel like we're short-staffed. There's never going to be enough resources. So it's more about managing and planning to the resources we have, and instead of promising every project in the current year, which is unmanageable, and then everyone's stressed and burned out, it's our job to say, okay, with these resources, here's what we can deliver to the policymakers, and if they want to give more resources, fine, but if not, we present a schedule that's realistic that we can ask our staff to deliver on, because otherwise the saying, if you prioritize everything, you're prioritizing nothing. That's what happens if you don't really schedule to the resources you have.
And is APWA seeing that the same on the national level?
Yeah, so what happened was it was almost a perfect storm. We as APWA lobbied for passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, and COVID had just happened, so we had a supply chain shortage and we had a workforce shortage, and now we finally have all of this money to build infrastructure or repair old infrastructure. And so we as a big cities group, we held a briefing up on Capitol Hill about issues of recruitment, retention, and then once you actually have a staff on board, what are some of the creative ways that large cities and counties are able to keep them? And it's public sector, so you can't necessarily offer all of the benefits private industry might. So we're being as creative as possible.
I think it's shifting to, it's certainly, it's about recruitment. We had a senior engineering position, this amazing position, and it's taken us 2 years to fill. But I think retention is becoming more important as you're having baby boomers begin to exit, the workforce. That's a huge loss of experience and knowledge, and the expectations of younger employees, more diverse, more women in the workforce historically than in public works. Managing those differences and keeping people is, I think, more important than ever.
And Sean, you had another issue in regard to where you are with updating your snow operations procedures. Speak to us about that.
Yeah, snow is one of those things that is incredibly important in a northern city. I mean, people lose jobs and election certificates when the streets aren't plowed correctly. And what we've seen is in St. Paul and Twin Cities is a huge change in the types of snow we get. So the winters are very different than they were 25, 30 years ago. Resident expectations have changed. And so we're beginning the process of completely revolutionizing how we address this critical public service in a northern climate and snow operations. So, and we're going to take our time to get it right. We're going to plan for success because it's too important to get wrong. But part of what the only thing I'd add to that also is that the ideas we got for this process are coming from our snowplow drivers and supervisors. It's the frontline staff that first said, why don't we do it differently? And that's who we're going to engage, obviously, with the public and doing it differently.
And you spoke a little bit about this, Scott, when you were talking about IIJA and all of this funding, but now we are seeing that some of that is starting to run out. So now let's look at funding on moving forward. What does that look like for the future?
Well, it's funny that you should say that. It will run out, but not all of what was appropriated is actually even out there. And I think our panel here would agree that one of the hurdles right now is accessing the money. We're speaking about workforce. What we know is that government is also struggling with being able to hire enough people to even administer the money that was approved. So we've got a few more years left on that, but we have started asking Congress what next. We've been told by the White House, let's focus on 1.2 trillion right now and spend it in appropriate ways. So APWA, big cities, counties are really working with Congress and the White House to help them deliver the money and educate our members on where to find the money.
And switching gears a little bit, Ted, to AI. Speak to how your city is implementing that, and have you found that it's all it's hyped up to be thus far?
Well, it's still early, and I guess one of the other differences of a big city, we're bigger ships that steer a little bit slower sometimes. So we do have an AI policy in the city of Los Angeles, and one of the things as a city or county you have to do is be cognizant of privacy of people's information. And so there's the free public version of AI that a lot of people are familiar with. We already have a policy that we're not allowed to use that within the city because everything you type in there is essentially becoming part of that database, and you don't know where that data is going, and so we don't want to be putting people's information in there and whatnot. So we're looking at evaluating the different options for subscribing for a corporate account so that we can use it more. But the way it's already being used in the city, it's mainly on the chatbot side right now. We're just getting into generative. In the Bureau of Engineering, we're just forming an AI committee to look at different ways that we could further use AI. So I do see a huge potential in the future to automate a lot of the kind of mundane reports and tasks and things like that we do, and even programming as well.
And if I may, and I was speaking with Sean earlier, and they're experimenting with AI on snowplow trucks.
Yeah, one of the things that we'll be doing is hiring a firm to computerize and automate our snowplow routes, and the new systems in place can use AI to adjust the routes kind of on the fly based on the circumstances. And so now we literally have our snowplow drivers looking at clipboards with paper directions on them. And the vendor that we hire, we're certain will use AI to help automate the routes. So that's going to save time, improve performance, save staff hours, and hopefully fuel.
Fantastic. Great discussion, guys. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, thank you.